Hi, welcome. This is continuing the reading of Walking a Rainbow along the Camino de Santiago with my son, who was 9 at the time. We have reached chapter 14 called Losing the Mask, and we've stayed overnight at Logroño and are leaving in the morning in the big town. Chapter 14, Losing the Mask. Logroño stretched forever, with shops and factories. 41 degrees, it said on the public tower, till we turned off, left, into a parched landscape. Dust devils swirled like wraiths. A figure appeared ahead, shimmering in the heat, running towards us across the uneven ground. A jogger, in this heat. As he passed us, he yelled out, "I am completely mad!" and pounded on. We took a break in the shade of some sweet-smelling pines some time later. I made tea with the last of our water already. I was getting to enjoy making tea, the ritual of it, unpacking the nested equipment, pouring just enough meths into the reservoir, having a stick nearby to adjust the damper if necessary, lighting the vapour. The process itself was pleasurable, a pocket of order. I began to understand a little more about Claudio's rice. As we sipped our tea, a hoopoe flew by like a crippled jay, quickly and desperately flapping its black and white wings with its fingered edges. It struggled to keep airborne, as if the ground's pull was too strong for it. It landed heavily and squatted low like a dachshund, dappled apricot breast and neck, and a crest like a cockatoo. A clown of a bird. A show-off, a bird with a burden like a self-obsession. It attempted magnificence and only managed the ridiculous. At least I felt as if I was beginning to understand what was going on here. I've said that as I walked, I found myself feeling increasingly wicked. Not that I was filled with evil intent, quite the contrary. I was also realizing what really matters and what is merely peripheral, and how the trivial can come to seem important when there isn't the time to allow the recognition of real worth. These important things were simple, like water and companionship. Well, one of the really important things that becomes pressingly clear is the need for love. It just rises up and confronts the psyche. I found this embarrassing. It seems so wet and inadequate, but there it is. The need for love is basic and vital. And this is much more a need to care rather than a need to be cared for. It takes us out of ourselves, the narrow boundaries of self-interest, so it isn't even good enough to care for those who care for us. That is too selfish to satisfy. That reinforces self. It has to be disinterested, a concern for those who, should we do something about our caring, would not be in a position to reward us for our effort. The love which nourishes is a free gift, giving without the desire or even the expectation of return. This is why I felt tender towards waifs and wastrels, and even actresses in pop videos. I was feeling for the unfortunates whom I could not help. What made it infinitely worse was the knowledge of my systematic incapacity to deliver such selfless care. I knew I wasn't good enough, couldn't be good enough. So I felt faulty, defective, I felt wicked. I shook off these depressions and packed up our gear. We walked on through an immense leisure park with a lake, mobile homes, an ice cream van, people in swimming costumes, people relaxing, people enjoying themselves. I could find no sense of empathy for them. It all seemed trivial and irrelevant, petty people about their petty business. With a sudden shock, I realised that trying to shake off depression, I was sinking deeper. I climbed up towards a big road. The lake far below now, a sheen of blue silk. On the top of a stalk by the path was a magnificent swallowtail butterfly. Cool lemon wings with black markings on the leading edge like piano keys. It fluttered in a semi-hover, struggling with its bulk over sun-dried flower heads. I turned to share the sight with Kez, but he was nowhere to be seen. I hurried on up to the main road, where he was waiting for me. We trudged in silence down the ferocious road. It was full of huge lorries which slammed past us, nearly knocking Kez over with their slipstream. The brutal heat pounded down. It must be over 45 degrees C now, and was doubled in the reflection back up from the melting road. We walked against the hot air as if combating a force. It had a pressure, an immovable soft wall like an enveloping liquid, which we waded through, streaming with sweat. On the horizon, a huge silhouette of a black bull, some sort of advertisement, loomed above and ahead of us like an obstinate negation of the sun. We took a break at a petrol station, swigging water from the freezer to replace the sweat, while lorry drivers sluiced the cabs of their trucks with hoses. It was a relief to turn down a lesser road. A van pulled up, driven by a priest, and youngsters piled out. Others drew up in a posse of mopeds. They were marking yellows on the road. They were very lively, and there was much backslapping and valiente. I smiled and smiled, but was relieved when they went. I wanted to get on, not walking so much as to try to deal with the feelings that the Camino was throwing up and obliging me to cope with. The mind doesn't like defects. They are where it doesn't run smoothly. A defect is an inconsistency. Established thoughts may be mutually incompatible, or some emotional habits not square with others, or actions not fit with what we think or feel we ought to do. There's plenty of scope. Even if we achieve the massive task of getting consistent thought, harmonious feeling, and compatible actions, and squaring all three, there's the higher level task of getting all of them to marry with the prime directive of selfless giving. Cards are stacked against us by the fact that the apparatus to perform effective changes is acquired late. In early life, we just live. We are having our character formed while we are incapable of conscious character building or effective character change. By the time we are self-conscious enough to be aware of what our personality is like, it has already been established. The defects have got built in. Worse, our personality is our identity. So a challenge to our personality is a threat to our sense of our individuality. We are not disposed for self-change. Worse still, we will have unconsciously devised various stratagems for concealing these defects, so they are not recognised as such. There are many mechanisms for this. Here's one of them. From time to time, a defect will have a consequence in action. The results of this action reflect back at us. This is an opportunity to recognize the defect and decide to address it. It is also a chance to construct a bit of self-defense, to conceal the defect from ourselves. Let us say that we have acted unkindly, contrary to our own stated principles of fairness. We could tell ourselves that this action was necessary in terms of independence and personal freedom. We convert it into something admirable. We have not acted unkindly at all. We have preserved our freedom against someone who tried to take liberties. Our principles and our vocabulary get altered to fit. The defect gets more firmly embedded and more difficult to even admit, let alone remedy. Individuals incorporate these deceptions into the mask of their identity. At the personal level, at the level of private relationships, at the wider social level. The skills of maintaining the mask become refined, habitual, sometimes added to. These skills are legion, and with unconscious practice become sophisticated and harmonized among themselves. The coverings for our faults are carried around like a psychological face, markings on the shell, part of what we are, scarcely noticed. Eventually, most of the individual's psychological energy is being used to sustain the mask, a complex mask with structure and substructure. It has a neuronal reality which is sustained and fed and nurtured with our life's blood, literally. It's in our brain like a spidery parasite. So the malfunctions in our being remain and spread, and our social context feeds them. The need to throw off the trap of our relationships becomes urgent. Then the Camino calls, however we may express it. Carrying all this churning, I had reached another main road, crossed a footbridge, climbed a steep path, and arrived at the edge of Navarrete. I stopped by a trough and fountain for a welcome drink to wait for Kez. I had been walking fast, self-absorbed. He was nowhere in sight. I waited a long time, sluiced and filled my water bottles. Had a fag, too. Still no Kez. I began to get worried. I reluctantly hoisted my rucksack on again and started back down the trail, down the ascent, over the bridge, into the fields. No sign. Panic kindled, but I kept it tight and small. I retraced my steps slowly, forward again, scanning the dust at every branching path for his footprints, following side paths, up and back, checking out shady places where he might rest. Nothing. I waited once more at the fountain. Where was he? His Spanish was minimal. He could never explain his situation. I imagined him setting off in the wrong direction. He must be miles off course by now, alone, scared, lost in the immense countryside without a map, or even a clear idea where he was going, lacking even the name of the next place on the way. I fretted and accused. He must be desperate by now, stumbling tearful through the fields in the fading light, all of Spain around him. I went on into the village and into the first shop. Mi hijo, my son, I said hysterically, and held my flat palm at roughly his height. Peregrino, pilgrim, I said, and made gestures to indicate that he was lost and that I was desperate. The shopkeeper and his customers discussed the situation, but obviously could not help. I ran out and down the main street, going in bars and shops, repeating the scene, to no avail. Dusk was settling, and it was growing misty. I tried to keep calm and think what Kes might do. Well, surely he must have realised by now that he'd taken the wrong path. The sensible thing for him to do was to retrace his steps to find the last yellow. We'd done this together many times. So I went back to the fountain, hoping to meet him returning to the right path. He wasn't there. Getting quite dark now. I went back down to the road, and there he was, tramping down the road towards the village. Well, thank God. I shouted, "Kes! Kes!" and ran towards him, ignoring the pain in my ankles, my rucksack bumping heavily on my back. I'd got quite close before I realised it was a very short and totally mystified young man with a humped back. I was desolate. Well, I could do no more tonight. Perhaps alert the police at the refuge. So back to the village once again. At the refuge, a monastery, I tried incoherently to explain that my son was lost to a young monk with a crew cut. He was callously unconcerned and took me out of the main building, past an open-air swimming pool and into a large garage. There, resting comfortably on a foam mattress, was Kes. "Oh, you wee bugger," I said, lapsing inexplicably into vernacular Scottish in relief. "What kept you, Dad?" he said. "Just in time for some rice," said Claudio, who was squatting on the next mattress, smiling, attending to his camping stove. I didn't calm down till the third glass of wine. "This is good wine," I said in a bit of a daze. "It is the wine of the region," said Claudio. "The wine of La Rioja. Some say it is the best in Spain. It's excellent. Rioja is named after the Rio Oca, which we will reach in 2 days." I think he was basically shy and hid it with instruction, like many a teacher. The Oca is important for the way. We meet it many times. It means goose. It is connected with a game for children. He described the game. "That's snakes and ladders," cried Kes. "Not quite, but related. It is the pattern of the way," Claudio went on. "You think you travel far, and then you fall back, perhaps to the beginning, and you must go on again." "I see, and the last square is Santiago." "No, the end of the Camino is Finisterre," said Claudio firmly. "The way is very old, older than the Christianism, and it does not go east towards the rising sun, the direction of the Christianism. No, it goes west towards the setting sun, the Celtic direction. To finish the game, you must go to Finisterre, the end of the earth, and watch the sun set into the sea. It is important." His eyes were unfocused. His attention was turned inward. He was talking primarily to himself. Though who could tell for certain? Things get said for all sorts of reasons. It must have got said in my presence for some purpose. I glanced up at him. He looked grimly serious. I was reminded of a day in 2 of the big art galleries of London. I had toured the Impressionists and was full of light and the intoxication of things, and then I encountered the Spanish Room in the National Gallery, with all its brooding shadow. Claudio had a morose streak. "Santiago is quite far enough," I said quietly. "Is Finisterre much farther?" No, 3, maybe 4 days. Why is it important? It is necessary to die, to contemplate your own death. It is part of the way, the most important part. We're going to sleep outside under the stars, said Kez, brightening. It is a warm night and the garage floor is hard, explained Claudio. It also stank of oil, gurgled with plumbing, and was alive with flies. So, after Claudio's excellent rice, mixed with tomatoes and tinned sardines, we took the mattresses and our sleeping bags outside and laid them on a slight slope above the swimming pool. The sky was stunning. The mist had cleared and the velvet sky was smothered with stars, the Milky Way a scintillating swathe. The milk of the goddess, said Claudio. It marks the direction of the Camino. I settled down, content, reunited with son and friend, in the warm and astonishing knowledge that I loved them both. We slept late. I was woken by shrieks and cries. Crowds of handicapped and retarded teenagers were excitedly teeming out of the main building, some of them in wheelchairs, some on crutches. So this was why we had been banished to the garage. They chimed Buenos Dias as they filed past, a late morning dip. Soon some were splashing and yelping in the water, while others, patiently waiting their turn, sat on the grass playing games and laughing frequently. Toothy grins with wide-spaced teeth. I lay propped up on one elbow on my foam mattress on the grass, enjoying their liberated enthusiasm for life. They appeared transparent, feeling into action instantly. Feeling refreshed by life's unfortunates, I strolled into the village to locate Kez's Mars bar. The people in the shops were anxious to discover that all was now well. I wandered around the place. So often, on a long walk, there is nothing to do but wait, stand and stare. A useful skill to wait with ease. On the way back, a bizarre and poignant object by the roadside. A dumped teddy bear. Its throat had been slashed. It had been mutilated. A slaughtered toy, ravaged and abused by some maniac child. I found it unsettling. It was some time before I returned to the pool. Only one young woman remained, stretched awkwardly on the grass. She looked broken. She spoke to me as I passed, but I couldn't work out what she had said. I smiled back stupidly. Swallows skimmed for insects over the empty pool. Kez and Claudio were stirring. I delivered the Mars bar and sat to write a poem. Roadkill. Face down by the roadside, a discarded teddy bear. I turn it with my foot and see its throat slit, its eyes wrenched and absent. Just a strange-shaped bag, a wreck of love. Over by the pool, I became aware that the young woman was calling. I went over to her and tried to decipher her Spanish. She lay with her head face down on the ground, her mouth close to the earth. She patiently repeated herself several times until I had worked it out. "Please," she had said quietly out of the side of her mouth, "can you turn me over? I am burning on this side." I did as she asked, of course. It was like manipulating a rigid, limp doll. It felt like an insult to be healthy. While Kez and Claudio were getting ready, the rest of the disabled emerged in theatrical costume. They were having a Roman day, and all were got up in homemade gear, decked out in paper and cardboard armour and togas. Most were in wheelchairs, some made their own painful way. One young man lurched past me, stiff and contorted. His arms hung lifeless on his torso, carrying his shield and his short sword. His head drooped to one side. Each step was a turning swivel as he dragged a leg around to flop it down ahead. He fell frequently. An organiser began a mock slave auction. He went up to a mass of warped flesh which had been unloaded into a wheelchair and cried out, "How much for this one?" He felt a withered arm, bent back at an impossible angle. "Excellent muscles!" he shouted. The guy in the chair grinned lopsidedly and dribbled with glee. "Here, see? Good teeth! How much? What am I bid?" A young woman bid extravagantly. The organiser did an exaggerated wink, and they all laughed uproariously.